So I'm Scott Murphy. I've started this series 2 weeks ago where we're talking about AWS Discovery. And at the very first session, just to recap, we showed how to set up mid servers inside of AWS. And then after we did that, we configured ServiceNow to discover devices inside of that AWS environment. And then in part 2, we showed how to set up AWS config, SNS, that's simple notification service. We set those things up in AWS to send notifications or events to ServiceNow. And then we showed how ServiceNow can take those events and update the CMDB, real time, almost, pretty real time, so that it doesn't have to run a discovery schedule to get updates from CMDB items. So it'll do configuration item changes and things like that. I've also since then created a knowledge article that has all of the documents I've been sharing. I didn't put the PowerPoints on there yet, but I'll do that to that same knowledge article, and I'll get all of those, that knowledge article related to all the share the wealths that we have been doing. With all that being said, I'll get started out on part number 3, where we talk about how to discover and AWS EKS Kubernetes systems. But first, I'm going to teach you a little bit about it because it's not a very well-known thing. So I'm going to go through a little bit about what Kubernetes is first, so you can learn at a high level what it is. And I had to do the same thing. I had to go, what is this? Because they're asking me to discover it. What do I do? I don't even know what it is. So it's a very complicated thing. I'm going to try to explain it at a high level, and I'll give you the resources to go look further into it if you want to. So first, what is Kubernetes? Then we'll look into creating Kubernetes cluster and nodes in AWS. It has to be there for you to discover it. So that's why we got to learn a little bit about it, create one, and then we'll configure ServiceNow to discover the cluster and the nodes that I create. What is Kubernetes? It is a portable, extensible, open source platform for managing containerized workloads and services. Makes a lot of sense, right? That facilitates both declarative configuration and automation. It has a large, rapidly growing ecosystem. Read more about it here. So this link, it's just a link to the Kubernetes website and their overview. They even have a Visio diagram explaining what you're probably traditionally used to, how apps were installed on like your computer. This is your traditional, you install multiple apps on an operating system on a piece of hardware, your laptop, blah, blah, blah. That's simple, right? We all are used to this. Then if you know much about VMs, you have a virtual machine on a big system, multiple virtual machines supported on the same hardware. This is a little different. Kubernetes is based on containers. It's this third thing over here where you create basically, I'm a VM guy, so I can think of it as an image. It's more of a configuration for an app, but it doesn't run on specific hardware per se. It can be requested to run on multiple things of hardware based on load. So if the load gets really high on the container runtime, if it maxes out, it can spawn another node, real time. So it adjusts itself and goes lower. It uses more or less resources based on load, which is awesome, especially in this digital world where virtual machines and you're using AWS or Google Cloud or something like that, and you get charged based on the resources that you're using. Whenever you put things in these containers, if you're not getting a high load, then why do you have 10 servers running a website that no one visits in the middle of the night? So if you have a high load during the day, they spawn up, they build containers, the containers multiply, they get bigger, and you have more instances of it running. So that's the highest level of Kubernetes that I can come up with and translate it to what you kind of know of today. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and we'll go, yeah, there it is. And yeah, this is the same Visio I just talked about from their website. But there is a lot more to look at that website if you want to look into concepts and things like that and touch on and read up a little bit more than what I just showed you. But I think that concept is good enough to grasp what we're trying to do here. That's what Kubernetes is and what we're trying to configure. So it doesn't come naturally to ServiceNow. You have to do a couple tweaks to it to get it to work. And also in Kubernetes, you have to give permissions and roles. And I'll show you that now. So yeah, demo time, let's build it. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you where that is. It's called Elastic Kubernetes Service. That is inside of AWS. And I currently do not have any clusters in the, US East 2 data center. So currently don't have any in there. You can do it like this, where you create, but if you do it this way, it takes, in my opinion, longer, there's a lot more steps to it. I'm going to do it with commands, command prompt commands, and I'm going to use the Cloud Shell that's inside of AWS to do that. So put it in my list. Shell. I do have a list of all the commands I've tried, and it's crazy. Don't pay attention to that. Let me find. I'm going to get this into a document. I haven't done that yet, but that will also be part of this. I do have a Word document on this, but it's assuming, the cluster is already there and things like that. I made it for the client. They already had that stuff. So I just had to show them how to use it. But for my purposes, for your purposes, if you decide to go create this, test it out on your own, play with it, get used to it, you'll need to know how to make a cluster. And you can go do it the graphical way. Sure, I'm not going to show that because this is honestly faster. So it is a little bit more technical because you're using, command prompt or command line, but it is faster to do it this way. So first thing I'm doing right now is I'm going out and installing something called EKS That's what I'm using. It's a library of commands that allow you to build clusters easily. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that installed in my Cloud Shell. And you'll have to run this each time you open Cloud Shell. If you close Cloud Shell, you'll have to reinstall EKS. Okay, so it's that quick. Then we'll go back up to my commands, and this is me going to create a cluster right here. Explain the command as it's running. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. It's going to take a while to do this. It takes, I don't know, 10 minutes maybe. So I'll talk through this as that's going on. That EKS what I just installed is the command I'm now using. And I'm just doing a create cluster. I'm giving it a name. This is the name that I've created with it. You tell it the version of Kubernetes that you want it to use. I'm probably not using, this is from December of last year, so there's probably a newer version now, but then you declare the region. I'm in US East 2 right now in AWS. It's going to show up there when I'm done, whenever this is done. You give it a node group name, this name here, which is, I have it set to Linux nodes. That's what that's going to be. Then you declare the node type, T2 micro. That's always the safest node type to pick for anything. Even when we were creating the mid servers, we picked all of this stuff graphically when we were making EC2 instances. And that's eventually what these nodes turn into. Whenever the cluster gets created, the nodes, the pod, all those things I'll show you when this is all done, they'll look like EC2 instances. They'll look like servers that are in there. But there you go. So yeah, and then you declare how many nodes at the very end, how many that you want. There's probably a lot more other commands you can put on here, but this is the bare minimum I needed to get this going. So if you ever want to look more into this, it's EKS CTL. You can Google that to see more information on how that works and what that is. And AWS is a great resource for this stuff. If you go to their website looking for documentation on anything, that's where I found most of this stuff. It was way too much for me to package together, but it is very easy to find, very easy to follow, like all the ServiceNow documentation that we have, right? I will take this time while this is running to kind of show you the path I took to get here. I think I start off my Cloud Discovery document with that. Yep. This is the community article that I used to go with. This document is in the knowledge article that I've already published for the Share the Wealth AWS discoveries, but it gives you step-by-step, how they configure this with screenshots, blah, 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 which was simple enough to understand. It did take me a while to get through some of this, but I thought a video would be great. I haven't seen a video out there for any of this. So that's why we're doing the Share the Wealth for a lot of this stuff, because there's no videos. I like seeing those. So that's why I'm providing the video on how to do these things. But this was my original source of how to do all of this, but it didn't have the things I'm just showed now. How do I create a cluster? How do I do all that? That wasn't in there. So I feel like that's good context to have so that you can actually go implement this stuff. Otherwise, you're waiting on a client to have it. And if it's your first time, what do? You just tell them, go do this? No, I like to have a little bit better approach to that. I like to have done it already. If I'm going to go tell them how to do something, that way I'm not sitting on the call going, well, I don't know why that didn't work, or did you check this? I can have some kind of context to go, did you check this? Did you check that? This is how I did it. So you can see how it worked, typical things. You all know what I'm talking about. We're all consultants here. So I like to have done it already. So that's where I started out at. Still waiting for this to create. Okay. At the time this was written, you had to download this update from ServiceNow and install it. It basically just creates a script include or modifies a script include that whenever the discovery schedule that we'd set up prior, whenever that runs and it identifies a Kubernetes cluster inside of your AWS environment, it will then create another discovery schedule just for that cluster. And I'll show that when we run through this. I don't think I've ever run through this on my current PDI. I think it stays on all the time for me because I have AWS connected and discovery running at a good regular rate. So hopefully it should be alive. We won't have to wait for that too. Okay, good. We're good to go. So back to my other browser. So that's still running. Let me go take a look at that to see if it's showed up yet. Yeah. So you can see now that that cluster has popped up in there. It's creating, doing all those things in the background. To me, that's just so much easier. Kicking that little command off and it going through and creating the cluster, the pod. There's like 3 or 4 layers of things you have to go do. So you can go through it that way if you want to go through it the graphical way. But even, what I've seen with other clients that I've seen work with them, that's how they do it as well. They do it with command line only. They really don't go in and do it graphically. So this might be a good time to jump over here, do the ServiceNow setup, and then we'll go back. We'll do a few more configuration items in AWS to make sure we have permissions so that when we run the discovery, it works. So this update set I do have downloaded. I don't know that I've put it in the instance. So let's go look at that. We just got that started up. Discovery schedule API update set. Yep, that's it. Okay, we've downloaded that. We've installed that. This adds a script include that works with the Kubernetes pattern to create discovery schedules for the specific Kubernetes clusters that it finds during cloud discovery. Then you're going to need to install AWS CLI on the mid servers that are doing the cloud discovery. Here's a link to that download. So click that. I think I already have that on there, but I may not. I'll have to check that. So that means I have to go log into my discovery server and see. Where is it? Is it in North Virginia? Let's see. Yep. So I don't know if I've showed this before, but this is how I connect to them. I just use RDP. I don't know my passwords. I'll probably get that. Oh, I don't know my private key either. The latest one would probably be that one. Hey, that was right. So I've got that saved. Now I could probably go in here and do this. So I'm trying to make sure I have AWS CLI installed. No, I think it would be in here or something else. Okay, so it looks like I need to go there. So in order to do that, I have to go download that. Unless I just double click that, maybe I have already installed this. Well, I'll show it anyway. I must have double clicked it. Yeah, I downloaded twice today. So it's not installed. I think it's just a vanilla install. Next. Go, and there's no configuration after that. It just has to be there. I'm guessing it uses, the pattern must use some files on here to do the discovery properly. That's about all I know. It was in the document of how to do it. So let's see, where did it go? I'd like to see, hey, I completed or something. Now the installer's still running down here. Yeah, okay, there it is. And I know by now that the cluster is created. We'll go take a look at that next. Okay, so we have that installed. We don't need to be on here anymore. So that is the only step where you have to have that on your mid server. Now, I know in the first video we set up a mid server in Linux. Emily Hadier took care of that. How to do what I just did in Linux. I haven't done that yet, so I really can't show you or tell you, but the website's still all the same. I'm sure you kind of do the same thing where you give it a URL, do a wget, you get the installer package for Linux, something like that is what you'll have to do. So, okay, I'm done with this session. Let me log out of here. Bring up my document. Okay, there's some properties we need to set and things like that. So let me go back and make sure that my cluster is here. Cloud shell, it's still waiting. Okay, so it's got some progress. It's made the cluster. Now it's working on the nodes. Okay, so it's still taking its time. Glad we did that first. Yeah, let's go back to here. And I think I can show you what the cluster looks like now. I switched data centers, so I can't. There we go. So the cluster is active. Just to give you kind of a, I'll explain some of these things, but here it is. Here's an overview of it. Here's the resources, the pods, pod templates, jobs, cron jobs, all kinds of things that are in there. Some of the things on the cluster, the workloads. So once those nodes get created, they should show up in here. Well, yeah, they should show up in this spot. So they are ready. So they must have just created. So there they are. So you see them here as Linux nodes inside of this cluster. They should now also show up inside of EC2 as well, whenever they're up and running. Boom, boom. So we have that name that I created, the cluster name, then with the Linux nodes, and then node 1 and 2. So they don't say node 1 and 2. I can change it if I wanted to. I'll go back a screen to my EC2 dashboard. You can see the instances running, my IPs, volumes, things like that. With the auto scaling group is what I was talking about earlier. That's key. These things auto scale to need. They go down, they go up. So that's a really cool part about the Kubernetes things, clusters. Okay, so back to the document. Let's get ServiceNow all ready to go. To enable the EKS creation, we go to these sys properties list. Over there, made it kind of easy for me. I don't have to type it in and misspell sys properties 2-3 times. Should have to find my window. There we go. Okay, sys properties. And what were they? SN ITOM pattern K8 S. There we go. Okay. So what am I setting? The mid server to the name of the mid server, which was set up above, and create schedule enabled to true. Okay. Be in that app. Yeah. No, mid server name. Go. Now create a discovery schedule which targets the AWS account that contains the clusters. We've already done that. Ensure you have, okay, this is important. the mid-security policy that will allow connections to Amazon, AWS.com. So don't remember where those are. All right, that's a menu upgrade. Okay, new. Active, yep. Okay. Without that, it will fail to connect whenever it's doing the Kubernetes discovery. Okay, back over to AWS. Now, ServiceNow should be set up. We just have to execute the discovery schedule after we get all these things done. The mid-server EC2 instance must have permission to read AKS objects. So we're going to go to the permissions, and here I say there are many ways to do this. I ensured my mid-server has a role with a trust relationship to EKS and ECS services. Also view only and or read only access permissions. I think in my previous videos you saw some of these things because I've already put them in here. I don't think that I have to go do it again, but I'm going to go check just to make sure. So let's go back to AWS and we'll go into IAM, identity access and management, or identity and access management. We will look at our roles. And the role for the discovery server is ServiceNow EC2 role. And my trust relationships, yep, that is already there. So EC2 is there. That had to be there for the discovery that we did before, the initial discovery. This is to allow EKS. So that trust relationship was added. Also, it's showing the view only or read only access in the permissions. So I think I showed that just by loading it. And I have more things. So I must have been doing some other things too, but read only, view only, they're there. I think you only need one of them, but playing around with it all, done more than I needed to. So next, we need to, in each EKS cluster in the AWS accounts, you must have the following. And I am mapping between the mid-server role, which is represented by this ARN ID, and then it's going to be to a Kubernetes username. So that's something inside of Kubernetes that we're going to go configure a little bit later after this step. But so let's go run that. So that command, we're going to go back to the command shell. Hopefully it's done with everything it's doing by now. Perfect. It is. Back to my trusty little sheet. More lines to run. So there's that command that I just showed. Have it already pre-configured for this cluster name, where it's at, the ARN ID for the ServiceNow EC2 role. So EC2 role ARN is this right here. So that's important for building that command. Okay, back to here. So there we go. So there's the role. There's the username ServiceNow Discovery that I'm going to set up inside of the EKS cluster soon. Okay. So that created that entry. Next, I have to go into the cluster itself. So this command is an AWS command to update the config, the Kubernetes config for the cluster that I just created. So now I should be able to run that in here. Looks good. Added new context. Okay. So that's what I'm looking at down here at the bottom of the screen. Now I can talk to that context. And this is the next thing I'm going to do. Add a cluster role, which allows a reading of all objects in the cluster. So there's two of them. There's one there, one here. What does that look like in how I input that in the system? That article that I read, that's verbatim what it had. I was like, well, how do you do that? This is what you do. You run this command here. And yes, paste it in. It puts that file in memory so you can access it in a later step. This is one of the files that you just saw in the instructions. There's two. This doesn't do anything per se. It just gets the file in the shell program so that you can apply it. Done that. Okay. Now we're going to apply those configs. This is applying that configuration to the cluster. Know much about them other than to know it's a type of configuration type file. AWS that's how they run everything, is off of YAML basically. But any command line things, configuration files is YAML, YAML, YAML. Okay, so those things got created. What does that mean? It's a way to command line something that I don't know. I don't think you could do it any other way. I didn't find out how to do it in here, but it's in now that I did that, those things show up in my cluster config. So when I come into here, I go to my resources. Gotta figure out my user shows up in here somewhere. Here's the config map that I did where I mapped them out. It's in here. Looking for that ServiceNow Discovery user. Oh, I may have, I just don't have it. There we go. Hit the role binding. That's what I just did. Okay, so they should be. Oh, I had a filter on. Okay, that's gone. So the role binding should have ServiceNow Discovery in it. Sorry, I'm misremembering. I know it's in it. What we did in command line added something in here. Don't have it off the top of my head where it's at. Anyways, the intention of what I just did was to allow the mid server read access into the cluster. And I'm pretty sure I can't see it right off the top of my head. It's in here, allowing that. That's the purpose of the commands we just ran. We're ready to go do the discovery. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And if I have time left over, I'll go look back into there and find in the cluster what I was just doing. It is in there. It has to be. I just ran it. So back to ServiceNow. Okay. So I'm going to go to Discovery Schedules. And right now we just have that master account and schedule. We've never tried to run a Kubernetes discovery, but it should next time we run this discovery. When it finds that Kubernetes resource cluster, it'll spawn off another discovery schedule for that Kubernetes to go do it. That's running. And this shouldn't take too long. This should take only a couple minutes. What if we had more than one mid servers for this purpose? Good question. I haven't seen it used by more than one mid server. If you do a mid server cluster, if you wanted to do more than one, I would recommend that. So if you're declaring in the configuration that you can just put the cluster name in there. That way you've got more resources to go do the discovery. So I don't know. I haven't done that personally, right? I don't want that going on in my test environments. I don't want to have a lot of machines in there. It costs more money. But that would be what I think you could do. Make a mid-server cluster, and then whenever you're going to configuring to do this, you can definitely just put the cluster name in there instead of the specific mid-server. And when I get done kind of showing you all this, there is the ability to put a mid server in one of these containers. You can make a container, you can put a mid server inside of one of these so that it can scale and go up and down. Haven't done it yet. I don't know that anyone's done it. I think someone here has done it in the company, but I've never done that. That's my next goal along this path, just a challenge for myself. I haven't had a client need it, but they did ask about it, and I pointed them to when you go to the mid-server installation website, it's there as a Docker container. Docker is another word for another company for containers. It's like Kubernetes. Again, I'm not an expert on that type of thing, but a Docker image, Docker container is what you can use to make these Kubernetes clusters nodes. Okay, so discovery is complete. Let's see what it found. You can see in the discovery log, a lot of times it found something. So I'm going to type in Kubernetes or Kuber. Didn't find it. Okay, maybe I'm looking. Well, I'll look for that later. Let's go see if it made another schedules. It did not. Should have made a schedule here if it worked. Okay, so I do need to go look at that discovery stats and see what happened. So it did find cluster. Oh, that's a role. Okay. There we go. Can't find any cluster in this service account, pattern name, AWS Kubernetes Discovery creator. Okay. So it didn't see the cluster. So it's saying because it doesn't have permissions. Okay, I do. This is coming back to me now. I remember whenever you do this for organizations, so like I explained in previous ones, if you have a parent account, like I'm running this with that master account, my cluster is in that secondary account of mine, and I must not have that trust relationship set up properly, but I know what to do. So let's go look at that. So it's all in IAM. It's probably why I set up all of that, those other roles and policies and things that I've seen. So let me go check that out. Let me look at my soon role. It may be something I have to do over in master account. Let me check my master account permissions. That's the risk of setting all this up for the. I try to take everything down and then build it back up as you can see it. That's the way I like to show how to do things. If it was all already built, there's not much to show. So sorry about that. But I'll get hopefully get this fixed right here and now. Okay, this. It's there as well. I'm not seeing my user in here. Let me look at my commands. I may have, yeah, no, that's in there. ServiceNow /discovery. And that's what I gave my username for my cluster. This is where all that is. That should give me the rights to do what I needed to do. These are my attempts in the very beginning to just log everything I ever ran in Cloud Shell. It's a bit unorganized, and that other thing I'm showing is a little bit more organized than that, but there are some cleanups after you're done to do the delete cluster for whatever the name of it is, which is nice too. It's a one-stop thing. Run it, you're done, and you quit paying for this thing. This thing, to have this node running like this is like $1 a day, maybe $3. I can't remember, but it costs you a little bit of money to have this thing running. So I like to destroy it once I'm showing it, which is why, have to reset everything up again every time. Okay, I think I've ran the commands properly, but I'm not seeing them show up right. Oh, maybe it was my cube config. Did I set that one up right? Yeah, the right name there. Go check my Cloud Shell, make sure nothing failed. I didn't see anything fail when I ran them. Yeah, that goes to the config map. Oh, I wanted to talk the resources. So whenever you do a resource, you can restrict which resources they have access to. And I think that command that I put in here didn't have star in it. My client asked me if they could restrict the things that it can see. I was like, yeah, sure. You can just name the resources by name in this command here. But the original article has a star right here. So I'm going to rerun this with a star in it. That could be it. Maybe I've done that incorrectly. So maybe if I follow my document, it'd be okay. Yeah, so resources with a star, get watch list. Okay, let's do that again. So maybe that's it. That's all I found that looks wrong to me so far. Sure. That was the cluster role. Okay. Now I'm going to re-review the other one. That's the ServiceNow Discovery user that should now be a cluster in the cluster role binding. Pretty sure that's the same as what I entered earlier. It's this file. Yeah, that looks fine. Just reapply it. Yeah, unchanged, so it didn't do anything. Okay. I'm gonna go rerun the discovery and then keep looking. This is my discovery global role binding. Okay. There it is. There's my user ServiceNow discovery with, okay, that's good. So maybe it was just the resources that I didn't have a star there, and that hopefully was it. So we will see. But this is what I was looking for earlier. All of that was in the file. If you looked at it line by line, the role binding looking at right now is there's a read-only cluster role that was created with all of these things, and then the role binding is what I'm looking at, what I just had on the screen, what's called Discovery Global, and then the user is this, and it ties it to the cluster role from before called read-only. So that's what allows it to talk to the mid-server and reply back. So I think I had that off a little bit, hopefully, and that was it. So yeah, I'll run through that again here. So if you go to overview resources, the resources inside your cluster, you go to authentication, no, authorization. You can see the cluster role. What I created was read-only. There it is, created 8 minutes ago. And that role ties to this. There we go. Okay, so it's not, if it doesn't work this time, it's not because of this. It's probably some of the other roles that I have with the, and trust with the role that I have created, the ServiceNow discovery role. It's completed. Let's see what the Kubernetes did this time. Can't find any cluster on this service account. Got less than 5 minutes left. Pressure is on to make sure I can show you this thing works. If I can't, I'll definitely, put something out there, addendum to the share the wealth or something like that to show what it was that got it to work. Apologize for not being able to show that, but this kind of just shows how complicated this stuff is, right? I know I ran into the same situation before when I did it the first time. Sorry, I couldn't do it during the time that I needed to be done to show how it works. But this is the gist of it. This is the complexity of it. Yeah, I'll take a couple more minutes to try to figure this out, but if I can't, sorry, it'll have to be shown later. But I will get that out there. Let's see, I feel like I did administrator access. I feel like I did I cheated and gave it the role all access, which you shouldn't do, but it could be a way to get around it and show it working. I do have it, don't I? I do. I did give it administrator access already. So that should work. Maybe check the other account. Okay, let me give it that policy here. One more try. So what I'm doing, I added administrator access on the master account side to the same role that exists on both accounts. So I'll see if that works. It shouldn't be adding admin access. That's not the answer, but that's the shortcut I'm going to try to take to show it. I'll figure out the true reason why. And the whole thing, the complexity of this is why it's not working is I'm not doing I could set up a targeted discovery just on my sub account, but that's not in a real world solution. That's not a solution that they want. When I pitched this to my client, they said, we don't want to have to set this up, a schedule up for every account that we have. We have hundreds of them. So I was like, oh, okay. So we worked together. We figured this out by doing the master account discovery. It can assume role into any account. It can find the clusters there. So we did get that working. Apparently, I don't, maybe I'm missing a step, but I thought I went and updated the documentation for whatever we did to make it work. I'll go review all of that and make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so what do we have? Couldn't find any clusters on this account. Okay. And so I'm guessing it's running on this server. Yeah, it's looking at cloud account, this cloud account. Okay. So looking at that cloud account, I think I know what to try. So when I set up my role identity mapping, I use this number. I may have to use my ARN ID from my other account. Maybe I grabbed the wrong one out of here, so that's the number I need. Try that. Okay. So I'm mapping it to the master account ServiceNow EC2 role, which may be where it's coming from because I'm discovering from the master account, assuming role into the others. That's my thought process. I don't know exactly. That could be why. Maybe that's the command I ran instead. So I'm also going to go do the mappings again, but with this other. Does it mention? No, it just mentions the names. Doesn't have that in there. Okay, I'm going to go rerun discovery again. Back to history. Looks like I got that there. So it's only looking on the master account. It's not looking on that sub account. So it looks like to me. Okay. Feel free to drop everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and close the call. I'll look into this, and I don't know how I communicate it. I'll ask Brett, what do I do? Maybe I have a session 4 where I show why this didn't work.